Having finished my first playthrough of Dark Souls last summer, I decided I wanted to create this video to reflect on my time playing the game. Dark Souls is a game I avoided for years, partially because I heard how difficult the game was, and also because I was deep into a Nintendo was the best, Zelda all the way phase that I would later grow out of after high school. It wasn't until I was strolling through GameStop when I found a used copy of Dark Souls Remastered on sale that I decided to finally play the game that I had ignored for almost a decade. For those that don't know, Dark Souls is an action RPG initially released in 2011, but getting a next-gen remaster in 2018, which is the version I played. You start the game in the Undead Asylum, locked in a cell, seemingly trapped until a knight drops your key in through a hole in the ceiling. As you progress through the asylum and get a basic tutorial going, you really do get a small taste of what this game has to offer. There's hollow enemies, you light your first bonfire, and get absolutely wrecked by this iron ball trap, allowing you to pick up the main healing item in the game, Estus Flasks. You get 5 to start with, and they don't refill until you rest at a bonfire, which respawns all the enemies throughout the world. Later you can upgrade the flasks to increase how much health is restored, and the bonfires can be kindled with humanity to increase the number of flasks, something I figured out way too late into the game. You use souls gained from defeating enemies to level up, but you drop them if you die, and if you fail to reclaim them before dying again, they are gone forever. There's obviously much more mechanical depth to the game, but we'll cover that later when I get to my thoughts on the combat system. For now, I want to cover the atmosphere and the mission you go on as the Chosen Undead. The atmosphere in Dark Souls is simply amazing. You are exploring a world in decay. Castles and structures are crumbling, vines and moss reclaim that which has not been maintained. There's no music anywhere except Firelink Shrine, which has a melody that is both peaceful and melancholy. It is a place past its prime, but it also serves as the central hub and your first place of refuge from the otherwise hostile world of Lordran. From here, there's a variety of paths to take and NPCs to talk to. You, as the Chosen Undead, are tasked with ringing the bells of awakening. You aren't guided to them in any way, and there's no map or objective markers. Just paths you can take and enemies on those paths. It's entirely possible for a new player to pick a path they aren't meant to reach until much later in the game. But that's where Dark Souls teaches you one of its most important lessons. You can always leave and come back later. This isn't a Zelda game where you must defeat a dungeon before advancing to the next. Dark Souls is very much like Metroidvania. There's so many paths and nooks and crannies to explore, gear to find, and experience to get. There's a graveyard full of skeletons that will constantly reassemble themselves until you defeat them with a divine infused weapon, which requires finding both a blacksmith and a special ember to infuse the weapon. The player can reach the graveyard as soon as they reach Firelink Shrine, and as I've said before, there's no warning signs or barrier preventing you from going here despite being totally unprepared for the challenge. You're free to run in and get killed over and over until you decide to try another path or just give up on the game. This can be frustrating for new players, but the satisfaction of coming back to this area, once you've leveled up and upgraded your gear to stomp these enemies that once seemed impossible, more than makes up for any previous frustration. The first bell is pretty simple to handle. It's the trip to the second bell, where the atmosphere gets darker, both literally and thematically. You have to travel through the depths, which is essentially the sewer system of Lordran and Blighttown, the toxic swamp where the refuse and rejects of the Undead Burg wind up. The depths are dark and dank, with slimes and pools of dingy water to wade through, and I can only imagine the stench that would permeate the narrow passageways you must walk through in order to get to the bottom of the depths. But even the bottom of the depths isn't the lowest you can go. Behind the massive metal door is the ladder down to Blighttown, an even darker and danker place to travel to find the second bell, down a rickety set of scaffolds set up to keep the lurkers out of the poisonous swamp. Across the swamp is a tangled nest of webs, the domain of the Chaos Witch Quelaag, who is a human torso growing out of a horrible spider. The further you explore the more remote regions of Lordran, the more twisted the enemies become. Once you ring both bells, you'll set off through Sen's Fortress and Anor Londo to collect the Lord Vessel, which unlocks fast travel function at bonfires, and then you must journey to the most remote corners of Lordran in order to collect the 4 Lord Souls, which will unlock the final area where you fight the final boss. I won't describe the atmosphere of each and every location in Dark Souls, but these early game areas are what hooked me into the world of this game. I wanted to see the terrible fate that had befallen the world my character now resides in. Now that I've covered the atmosphere and the world that has captured my attention, it's time to talk about my favorite part of Dark Souls, the combat. Dark Souls combat is the most engaging combat I've ever experienced in a game before. You have to read the enemy's attack animations and decide whether you need to block, dodge, or parry, all while managing your stamina bar so you can counterattack, riposte, or make sure you aren't knocked off balance trying to block a powerful strike. The variety of weapons, armor, shields, and spells means you can tune your build however you like. I played a strength build with a Zweihander, and I've experimented with other playstyles the game supports. The game does punish you pretty harshly for overextending or mashing buttons in a panic. It requires more attention and care in order to effectively take on even basic enemies. If you try to play it like a hack and slash, you're probably not going to get far, especially in some of the more ganky areas. Where the game really shines is the boss fights. Almost every boss fight was a thrilling experience, and even the less amazing bosses had design aspects I really enjoyed. Like, even though the Moonlight Butterfly isn't a white-knuckle roller coaster fight, the design of the butterfly itself and the music were magical. I'll cover the less than stellar bosses when I cover things I didn't like about Dark Souls. The best boss fight in the base game has to be the 2v1 battle with the Anor Londo Tag Team Champions, Ornstein and Smough. Smough, the giant executioner with a massive belly and even larger hammer, and Dragon Slayer Ornstein, not as big or powerful as Smough, but extremely fast and has ranged lightning attacks. Facing these two alone will settle whether you can finish this game or not. If you can beat these two, you can beat anything else that stands in your way. This is where a lot of players will get frustrated and give up, and I was tempted to give up here as well when I fought them at New Game Plus. However, there is a certain boss in a certain area that is my least favorite part of the first Dark Souls game, and that is the Bed of Chaos at the end of Lost Izalith. Lost Izalith is my least favorite area of Dark Souls. Worse than Blighttown, worse than the Catacombs, worse than Tomb of the Giants. I'm not usually a fan of fire lava levels in games as is, but when most of the enemies are reused from earlier, it just feels lazy in comparison to the first half of the game. You fight Capra and Taurus demons, which had full boss fights early in the game, and one of the 4 bosses in the area is the Demon Fire Sage, which is the 3rd appearance of the Asylum Demon type boss, except this time they're red and on fire. I can accept Capra and Taurus demons appearing. Demons are born of the chaos that Izalith is based in, and they serve as a benchmark of how strong you've gotten since your first encounter with them. But an entire boss battle with a recolor? That's just underwhelming at best. The eye-searing lava that's all over the level is another problem. I just don't like looking at it. It hurts my eyes after a while. The Centipede Demon and Ceaseless Discharge are fine enough bosses, even if the arenas are not my thing. All of these issues culminate in the absolute worst boss fight in the entire game, the Bed of Chaos. The Bed of Chaos plays like no other fight in the game, which would normally be an interesting twist that I would appreciate, but the execution is totally bungled. In this fight, you have to go to each side of the room and destroy 2 glowing roots surrounded by glowing orbs. After doing this, the main body becomes vulnerable and dies in a single hit. It's an interesting concept, but getting to these orbs is beyond frustrating. Giant holes get opened up in the floor, and the Bed of Chaos' sweeping attacks will knock you into these holes, killing you instantly. Attacks that don't knock you in usually stun you long enough for a follow-up attack to send you plummeting to your doom. Each time you die, you of course drop all your souls, and then have to do a long, tedious run back just to try again. If you do manage to destroy a route, it does stay destroyed for the next attempt, so you can just quit out or die to start back at the bottom of the slide, leading into the boss room, which is the most fun I had the entire fight. The final problem I have with the fight is reaching the main body. It requires you to jump into a pit and land on a branch, which lets you run to the main body and attack. My least favorite part of Dark Souls is trying to make jumps. Jumping in this game isn't satisfying in any way, it's just clunky and irritating. Maybe that's a skill issue on my part, but I would rather do 3 Blight Towns back to back than ever fight Bed of Chaos again. There's ways to cheese the boss by using ranged weapons, but if a boss needs to be cheesed in order to be passable, it's not a great boss. Which is disappointing, because I do think the concept is sound, but the application being this botched does impact my enjoyment of the game. Whenever I start a new character, I dread coming back to Lost Izalith. Overall, I would have to say the second half of the game as a whole isn't quite as strong as the first half. The level design isn't as strong, and one of the last 4 areas you visit prior to the final boss is just miserable. I didn't feel the same wonder I did prior to defeating Ornstein's Smough. Not to say it wasn't an enjoyable experience, far from it. I did enjoy the Duke's Archives and New Londo pretty well, and as frustrating as they were, the Catacombs and Tomb of the Giants were still places I enjoyed exploring and searching for gear and fighting new enemies. It's just not as amazing as the first half of the game. Now that I've covered the combat and certain level designs, the quest you've undertaken, and complained about Izalith, I briefly want to cover the music. It's simply amazing. That's it. Firelink Shrine fits perfectly, and all the boss themes are amazing, and the final boss theme itself makes me cry. That's all I can say. Dark Souls 1 has become one of my favorite games of all time. The way the music, the atmosphere, the level designs, the combat system, the boss designs, and the variety of equipment come together has been as mind-blowing to my adult mind as Ocarina of Time was to my child mind. That's not to say these games are the same, but much like I gasped in awe at the level of freedom I found exploring Hyrule, taking a trek across Lordran took my breath away. At this point in writing the script, I'm at a loss for words. Go give the game a try. Experiment with different builds, explore, fight bosses, and most of all, don't forget to get good. Post-production Jake here. This is my first attempt at a video essay-ish kind of video. Let me know if you guys want a follow-up for the DLC. I know I didn't talk about that at all in the first video. But thank you for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments. Goodbye.